It's not that deep. Everything love, lust, and life.
Sex. We talk about it so you can get better at it. We can all get better at it and maybe feel a bit happier in the process. It's not that deep. Or is it? Hi, welcome to our first episode, Is Commitment Where Sex Goes to Die? I'm Fran, this is my husband Andy. We've been together for 11 years and we've been married for 11 years and together for 13 years. And this is my friend Rebecca, and you're in a long-term relationship as well, aren't you?
Yeah, I think I've been in a fair share of relationships. I'm excited to be able to communicate about a healthy one. So, really excited to start talking about our topics. And today's one's quite an interesting one. Is commitment where sex goes to die? So what do we think? What's everybody's first initial thoughts on this topic?
I think a lot of people think that commitment or marriage or long-term relationships are where sex tails off, and that you start having a honeymoon period and then it just sort of disappears over time, and that's kind of a lot of people's experience of it. We've kind of had that briefly, sort of middling period of our marriage we did, but then it's sort of turned back on again, hasn't it? We've sort of started rediscovering ourselves.
Yeah, we went through quite a long period where we didn't have much sex at all for different reasons, and they're reasons that all people will have. You know, as you go through life, there are certain stresses, challenges, things that hit you as a couple, as a family, and as an individual that can really impact on that. There's no smoke without fire, and there's so many analogies and little jokes around the drought when you get married, and things all go downhill from there, that it's so easy for that to happen. And I think for lots of people it does. And I think the ones that are successful in rekindling that, it's all about communication and lots of things that we'll talk about today about how you can arrest that fall, really.
I think one of the key things that a lot of couples find just kills sex for them is children. We've got two. We've got a 9-year-old and a just turned 3-year-old. So we've had quite a long period of having them in the way of our sex lives, and it does take a lot of time to sort of get back into the flow after having a child, but then also finding time when you've got two of them, because you're so busy, you know, getting them out the door, getting them to school, dealing with them when they come back from school, getting them to bed, and it becomes just this sort of train of things that you need to do that you don't end up finding time for each other in that time.
And I guess there's like the privacy aspect as well. Like, I think privacy can be really important for a lot of people's sex lives, and you just don't have that when there's children running around your house.
No, you don't. And definitely a lock on the door is important.
The hat in the door, they see in the films with like a...
Yeah, no, kids are not going to respect that. It's just lock them out. And even then we've got a lock on our door, and even then we've had moments of like the youngest one scratching on the door, being like, let me in. Oh.
So how do you manage that situation, and how do you keep that up? I mean, from somebody who doesn't have children, I sort of see that situation as just like killing it all, killing the sex completely, but clearly it's not for you guys. So how's that carried on?
It's making the time for each other, isn't it? And I think this is making time for intimacy that sort of ramps up into sex. I think the intimacy is the thing, especially when you've had a drought, that just finding time for each other and just sort of space for your relationship. We started date nights relatively recently, about a year ago, wasn't it? And that helps as well, just scheduling time in to spend time with each other that's not specifically about sex, just helps you sort of get into the mood a bit more in tune with each other. Yeah. And then the sex sort of becomes a bit more of a, rather than something that is missing that we've got to work on and that's a goal and it becomes that kind of stressor, it's more of something that flows.
Yeah.
So we're a lot more touchy-feely with each other than we were years ago, I think. In fact, throughout our whole relationship, I think we've got more and more touchy-feely as time goes on.
I think that's because we sort of realise that you can't depend on necessarily having the time or the opportunity or the energy to have this wonderful session in an evening, because so many little things can get in the way. So as we've got older and spent more time together, we've realised that sometimes you need to just sort of find that time whenever you can. And I think an important thing for us as well is that we have a sense of humour about sex. So you said about the little fingers scratching at the door, and you're in the moment, and you know, it could really easily extinguish everything because there's a sort of zombie trying to get in the room. But I think from our perspective, we've just laughed it off, and you know, if responsibly, of course, you know, you deal with them, you get them off and off away where they should be, in bed, probably asleep, and then you know we can laugh about it and rekindle it. If you were really serious about it, it would be quite hard to maybe get going again after that.
It's a kind of a keep going, I'll be back sort of moment, isn't it?
Keep the fire burning, as
Off we go.
So did you guys find in your relationship, obviously you've been in a much longer relationship than I have, that it was true for you that commitment, I guess, what does commitment really mean? Everybody knows about the honeymoon phase and how intense sexual relationships are in the honeymoon phase. Like, I've seen that a million times in my own story. But what's the difference when, I mean, you're married, you know, when you sort of had been together the 5-year mark, the 10-year, like, what was the difference for you? Did you notice the difference?
Well, at the 5 to 7 year mark, I went through a big period of depression. So sex just was off the cards. I just really kills your libido. And so we had a period where we had probably 18 months or so, maybe 2 years, where we didn't have sex maybe at all, or at least once or twice rather than much at all. And I think what really helped was that you didn't, there wasn't that kind of acrimoniousness that sometimes comes, you know, is the problem me? What's wrong? We need to fix this sort of feeling. You were really understanding and gave me space and realised that actually it wasn't sex wasn't the problem, that, you know, that I had to be well to be a hooker.
I'm not going to make myself out to be this high and mighty saint, but you've got to be understanding of that. And at that particular time, it was true that you were going through a hard time. I just didn't think it would have been fair to push. Now, it did go the other way in that I sort of got to the point where I almost didn't want to try to suggest it or initiate it. Not through fear of rejection, but just because it's probably not going to be the case, and it will probably sour the conversation or that moment in time between us. And so it became easier not to ask. Now, I know for a lot of people that could be a challenge, and probably is. I think for us, we've always got on well. We've always communicated pretty well, and more so recently, definitely. But even back then, I think it was a case that it was just about realising that it wasn't the right time. We're putting, and you were putting in effort to try and, you know, help yourself and get better and feel better. And, you know, having come through that period, you know, things are way better now in every sense. And I think it's just about, sometimes you've got to have a bit of patience in a relationship.
Communication. I don't think we communicated on it enough at the time, but we didn't know at the time.
Yeah.
And I think when you've got one person whose needs are not being met, I think there needs to be at some point communication before you get to the point of resentment as well. I don't know if you did resent me or not, but
I think probably in the back of my head, yeah. It's not necessarily a thought or an emotion that you can control all that easily.
No.
I think sometimes in my mind, it probably did feel like it was being withheld because, you know, I'd done something wrong or whatever. But looking back, I realised that wasn't the case. But then, you know, it got to the point then when you did feel in the mood and wanting to, there was always this flicker in my head of, well, maybe I should say no. And almost not to spite myself, but you just have that flicker. And I think it's important. You've got to get a control of that. Because I think it's true for any relationship. It's like a gym membership, isn't it? You start going, it's brilliant. You hit it 3-4 times a week. The chances are for a lot of people, it is going to tail off after a period of time. And it's the same in a relationship. You know, you go from that honeymoon period, like you say, and things naturally will dip, and they'll improve again, and they'll dip, because that's just the way the world is, isn't it? It's peaks and troughs, and it's how you deal with the troughs that's important.
How do you find it, having a different level of sex drive?
Yeah, so unusually, I guess, in what sort of is known in the common society, I'm the one with the high sex drive, and always have been in every relationship I've been in. So it has ended up being a challenge, because I start off these relationships and I say, oh, by the way, I have a really high sex drive, and every single partner I've had have been like, no, just you wait, I sex drive. And I was like, yeah, I don't think so. And then every time it ends up me being like, you hit this sort of 6-month mark, 1 year mark, when the honeymoon phase, well, I think it can be up to 18 months, when the honeymoon phase is like well and truly over, and I'm still there wanting sex every single day, which is a big demand for anybody. And it is, like Andy said, having to manage that resent and being like, why don't they want that with me? And shouldn't men want sex all the time? Isn't that what society's taught us? Which is it's just so wrong. Like, I think men have been labelled as that, and women have been labelled as sort of the fragile ones who, don't want sex and want to refuse it. And maybe that's the case in some relationships, but it's definitely not the case with me. So I think it's a combination of understanding that my needs are different, and my needs, I cannot, the other person in the relationship can't just cater to me. It has to work both ways. There has to be a team effort in terms of I need to work with what they're able to give, and when I'm just overstimulated and like, what do we call it? Like hangry, but for sex, like sangry, basically. When I'm like that.
Horny.
Yeah.
That's the word.
Horny is definitely the word. But like it's but it's like hangry, horny, like angry. I get angry about it. I get really sexually frustrated, right? To the point where I just don't feel, and I don't think people are like this. I think it's unusual. I have got a hormone condition where my testosterone is abnormally high for a woman anyway. But I had to get very good at like sorting myself out, really.
I think people do get frustrated in that way, but don't recognise it as being just, I need sex, I need to sort this feeling out.
Yeah.
And I think that they end up arguing over other things when actually their needs are not being met.
Yeah.
And I think that might be a common thing, actually.
That's something you and I, Fran, talked about way before this podcast, is about how it's so easy to feel like we're bad for wanting sex and there's something wrong with me for wanting sex. Whereas, in reality, we're just people who like having sex. And I think that's fine. And I think there's so much taboo around being people who enjoy sex. I think, religion has played a part in that, and sort of society in general. The whole no marriage before sex thing is a fairly recent ideology. And sex is still seen as a little bit dirty and shameful, and especially for women, I think, like, not to get too...
The fact that we don't talk about it in society actually all that much, and yet it's as important to your well-being as food and the right nutrition, and sex is part of that kind of well-being thing, and we've just sort of sectioned it off like it shouldn't be there. It shouldn't be part of like everyday life and everyday talking, really.
Absolutely. So what are some of the reasons people could lose their desire for sex through commitment? Andy, do you have any ideas on this one?
I think I can speak from our personal experience that the challenges of life is a massive one. I think as the longer you're on this planet, your level of responsibility often goes up, whether that be through work, personal care, kids, and everything else. You end up with so much on your plate. And it's true of men and women that can be overwhelming at times. And I think that it certainly has been for us in lots of different ways over the years. And I know from speaking to friends as well that sometimes that overwhelm can be there, and it can be in so many different ways, but it ultimately dampens your spirit and your will to enjoy life.
So I think just generally being knackered, I think.
Yeah.
We've both, in the last month, both of us have... The other ones wanted sex, and we'd be like, no, I'm just too tired.
Yeah.
Sorry, love. I presume you've probably had that as well.
Yeah, and I think you and I, Fran, have discussed this before, is where my partner and I have very different sort of, like, he is very much, I need to go to bed, like, I'm tired, whereas I could be partying till 2 a.m, not bothered about it. So we've had a discussion about it, and communication, it was so important. If we hadn't had this conversation, I don't know where we'd be right now, in that his sex window needs to be before 9 p.m. Like, otherwise he's downhill. It's not worth it. It's too stressful. And I'm pretty flexible, from any time of the day, 24 hours, I'm good to go. But something, we did learn that that happen through that communication that we have different time schedules, and him saying, you know, best thing to do is ask me when we get home if you're in the mood. And I'm like, I'm always in that mood. But that's really helped us, I think, is figuring that out, because for him, he's often tired.
The science backs it up, though, because genetically everyone's different. Some people will be more suited to being up early in the morning and cracking on with the day, and some people a little bit later, their brain will kick in with certain hormones at different times of the day. And that carries through to the end of the day as well, where, you know, some people will naturally start producing the hormones to go to sleep earlier than others. And I think we've gone through spells of that in the past where you always want to have sex at night when I want to go to sleep, whereas I'm probably more earlier in the days when it would naturally be better for me. And sometimes it's just
quite often bounce in the morning and be like, right, let's go. No, I need a good run up at a morning. I can't deal with anything before a certain time. I've got better as we've got older and we've got more in control of our sleep patterns, which does really help. That's another one. But I think a lot of it is just finding time for each other. That's what sort of disappears. Everything in life is so busy, and you become so focused on all the other things that you just sort of forget about the person that's been there for so long. Yeah. They become almost part of the furniture, but that relationship needs maintenance.
I was just about to say that it is the maintenance, isn't it? Emotional, physical, sexual.
And once you get back into it, it tends to snowball and you tend to want it more. Yeah. So I think those droughts tend to be actually, once you sort of break that barrier, it's like when they say about drinking men, isn't it? You know, when you break the seal, you then need to pee a lot. It's the same sort of thing about sex, really, I think. Once you've got back into it, then you feel much more like you want it more.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've gathered some stats for you, which kind of say a lot of the things that you just said to me, Fran. Particularly a thing that's known as, you have like different types of desire. So you've got spontaneous desire, which is people such as me who randomly find themselves in the mood to have sex, regardless of whether they've had any physical contact or not. And then other people have responsive desire, which is, as you were saying, this is where people aren't necessarily turned on until they've been physically aroused, and then they want to have sex. So that is a really interesting concept.
You also might be different types as well. Yeah. I mean, I'm generally fairly spontaneous about it, but I think a lot of people need a bit of a run-up at it and aren't often given it before they're propositioned.
Yeah.
And actually, I think a lot of intimacy without the real thought of it being specifically for sex is just a nice kind of way of getting into it, massages and time together. Yeah. We spend a lot of time in the shower together, and sometimes they're just getting clean showers, but sometimes they develop from that. And I think I really appreciate that time, because it's non-kid time. Yeah. The door is locked. We've got that space, and it's purely our bubble, and it's safe. And it feels nice us time, doesn't it? And then we can go from that to, let's just wash my back sort of thing, to, oh, look, I've got this, to let's keep going with that sort of thing. And that quite often happens just from having time together that is purely for us and focused on each other.
Yeah, and it is being sort of emotionally turned on as well as physically turned on, I think, particularly for
and without any expectation. Okay, because we quite often, if it's we must have sex sort of thing, that it's all built up to this pyramid of we must do this thing, and then that's what sort of adds stress in, especially if you're sort of anxious about something or there is a bit of resentment or something. It just sort of adds to it, but putting it on a plinth rather than just sort of let's roll with what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. So from my research, 12% of all married people haven't had sex for at least 3 months. What do we think about that?
I can see that being the case really easily. We've gone for similar periods of time in the past.
Yeah, more than that probably.
And I'd describe ourselves as quite sexual people. So, if it happened to us because of circumstance and everything, I can quite easily see that being the case.
If it wasn't from a bit of specific circumstance, if you didn't have as much of a reason, do you think you would be questioning the state of the relationship if you didn't know why? People who don't communicate it.
Yeah, I think it's easy to question the relationship rather than question your position. Like, have you talked about it? Have you assumed that someone else is thinking something rather than actually asked them? I think we think very differently about things, and I think that's common in relationships. But you just sort of assume that the other person is feeling or thinking a way without actually asking them, and without actually knowing whether there is a problem or not, or whether you've just sort of fallen into it and you're quite happy with it. I mean, there are periods where we've not had sex for a while, and neither of us has been particularly bothered. You know, we've just not been feeling it. So you do go through periods where you both can feel down. You both are up and down, and if it just happens that you're both at a bit of a dip at the same time, then that's not really a problem. But if one of you's at the peak of I'm really frustrated and the other one's in a dip, then that's when the communication really sort of sets in, and it's really key. And the more we've communicated, the more easy it's been to come back from those little drought periods.
Yeah.
Or to just work out whether they are a drought, or whether you're just both, you know, tired, or, you know, whether there's other things in the way.
Absolutely. So 24% of respondents in one survey said they had sex 4 or more times a week before marriage, but only 9% have sex so frequently after marriage. Do you think there is something about marriage itself? I mean, 4 times a week is pretty generous for that 24%. Do you think there's something about marriage in particular that might indicate that, or do you think it's because people tend to have kids after marriage? What do you think the reasoning is behind that one?
It's kids and settling down, I think.
I think that marriage often is just associated with length of time, isn't it? And I think, like I said, with the gym analogy, you things are fun at the start, and there's naturally a dip as things go along. And so I think it's just coincidental in a sense that it's after marriage, but it's usually for most people that's after a period of maybe 3 to 5 years. It's natural that things will start to trail off at that point.
Yeah. It's interestingly, and there's a lot of studies that say this, even though the frequency of sex decreases into marriage, relationship satisfaction goes up, especially sort of straight after marriage. I think it's been shown as a really happy time for couples, which I think is quite interesting.
Because you're focused on each other and your relationship, and the focus is suddenly on the relationship again, even though it's no different. It's just a piece of paper now, but you've suddenly looked at it again, and you've probably injected a little bit more of interest into it, and maybe tried something new as well. I think because you've got that time dedicated, you know, a honeymoon time specifically is time dedicated to you and your relationship, so you've looked at it on purpose.
Yeah.
I think as well, frequency is less important than quality. We have better sex now than we did 10 years ago.
Yeah.
We maybe don't do it as often, but we definitely have a better time when we're doing it now, because you learn things about yourself, you learn things about your partner.
And you're not focusing, again, like I was saying before, that you're not focusing on the gaps as being a problem if you're secure in it.
Yeah, that is true. I like that. So there is a strong link between a good sex life and a happy overall relationship. Sexual satisfaction contributes to relationship satisfaction, and that's been proven in multiple studies. Good sex can even offset the negative effects of communication problems in relationships. I think we're all familiar with sort of the benefits of sex after an argument. You're like, oh, we're best friends again. Having less sex than you wish you were having can make your relationship less stable and increase the likelihood of a breakup. And lower sexual desire can sometimes be related to larger relationship issues. So I think that point is they're saying that, like we were saying earlier, if there is a drought within sex and there isn't an obvious reason, you need to have that conversation, because there might be something else going on at the end of the day that needs to be discussed. Here's an interesting one, sort of, I guess, in terms of the manifestation point of view, if people believe in that. A 2018 study found that those narratives about passion decay, so that's where people who believe passion would decline in their relationships over time, so people who believed in that in long-term relationships, it did become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So they really did experience lower commitment levels over time from having the belief behind passion decay. So if anyone's into the sort of manifestation side of things, then the science is saying that if you think bad, then
Well, also, if you are thinking that passion is going to decline over time, you're going to be less willing to put the effort in.
Yeah.
And I think if you have had a drought, it does require more effort than normal to get back from it, doesn't it?
I think we're so used to the chemical-fueled honeymoon phase, first 18 months, where it's like, you don't have to try, everything's breezy, to, oh, we actually have to make a serious effort to keep this up, and we have to want to make that effort, both in a sexual sense and an emotional sense.
And what's hard, because of commitments, then you may well have to make a real effort to schedule it. It can be almost something you've got to put in the diary to make sure that you can
I think
find
that's
the
really
time.
important.
People have to be serious about wanting that relationship, I think, to make it work, particularly in this day and age where, you know, just like Amazon, if you don't want that one, throw it away, get another one.
Yeah, and I don't think that leads you to the depth that you were saying. You know, the longer people are together, you get that depth, and that feeling grows. But maybe the sex doesn't, but the quality really does, and you can't get to that if you're always hopping from relationship to relationship.
Yeah.
But the scheduling, I think, is really important. I think even if you're not scheduling specifically sex, I think scheduling sex is putting too much pressure on it, but scheduling time for each other. And even if it becomes, oh, I'm too tired for sex, well, let's just do a massage or something. Mm-hmm. Like yesterday, we had a foot spa moment because we'd both been up a ladder for ages and we had sore feet. But that was really nice. And it was really nice that you'd thought of that. And it's just those sorts of things. I mean, we didn't end up having sex at the end of it because we were actually exhausted. But it's those sorts of things that can lead to nice flowing sex that's got no pressure on it.
It's intimacy, isn't it? In whatever the way that shows up.
Yeah.
And I think it's important as well. State your intentions.
Yeah.
If you are in the mood for it, and you know that later on I'm going to be firing on all cylinders, let your partner know earlier in the day. Yeah. Because then it can grow in their mind. It can be something that they suddenly become in tune with that maybe they wouldn't have. If you leave it until midnight and then say, I've got this, there's a good chance they're not going to be interested.
Brilliant. What do you want me to do with that? You know, but yeah, and that's the thing. If you've sort of prepped the groundwork, you know, being like, you know, I'm pretty certain I'm going to feel like this in the evening.
Yeah.
How do you feel about us maybe doing this sort of thing, and sort of setting the scene? I think is quite nice.
We're going to go on to a couple of different ideas to help in this situation, which you guys have sort of covered quite a bit of so far. But my last study is by Love Honey, and in this survey of US citizens, 3% said they never talked about sex with their partner. A third of 18 to 24-year-olds said they communicate just once or twice a year. 40% said they communicate weekly, and 29% monthly. And it just breaks my heart. I don't know how you can have a healthy, fulfilling relationship without talking about sex. And I'm speaking as somebody who did that and just had a terrible sex life because we never talked about it.
How can you have good sex if you don't talk about it?
And how can you have a good relationship if you don't have good sex?
Yeah. I mean, I went through the first 6 years, I think, of my sexual experiences not talking to the people about it, and I didn't have good sex at all during that time, really, as a result of my own actions, not as a result of anyone else's. They didn't know what I wanted at all. I never communicated that. And so, yeah, I think we are really good at this. And that's one of...
I think we've got better at it.
Yeah.
When we first met each other, you just kind of literally throw things together and get on with it, don't you? And that's okay for a while, but you do need to... You need to grow. You need to add more things in as well to keep it interesting and to keep it fresh. You can't do that unless you talk about it. If you have quite vanilla sex as a couple for a while and it starts to wane, if you just walk in with a full-on leather outfit and a metal whip and you haven't spoken about that to your partner, they're going to be a little bit shocked. How are they going to react to it if you've not talked about it? Because it may be the complete opposite of what they want. It may be absolutely what they want. But if you don't talk about it,
you haven't had a run-up to it. You've not even given them a chance to lead into that sort of thing. But I think that's where, if it's started to die a bit, that maybe switching it up, and it can be really little things, and just changing one little thing can make a big difference. And you can start that sort of process and just add another thing, next time, and just really slowly add new things can completely transform your sex life, without doing major things like setting up a dungeon or whatever. You just simple little things like, let's try it in a different room. I mean, really simple things like that. We're fans of having to go outdoors as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that got from, let's do something really, really safe, but slightly different. And we've got more and more adventurous with that over time. And that I find that really adds an excitement level to it.
Yeah, 100%. So moving forward, things that can help people sort of build that relationship and build that sex life back up again. Scheduled sex we have talked about briefly, so it can be just as sexy. It is, like you said, getting that sort of feeling. If at the beginning of the day, like Andy was saying earlier, then you've got the rest of the day to build yourself up to it and you get worked up towards it. And also you're saying, no, this time of day, on this day, we're not doing work, we're doing this, because that's helping us build up our relationship. Another one, which is kind of similar, is maintenance sex. So this is where both people need to climax. So you have to, it's like, I guess, scheduling sex, but you're communicating what you want from that as well. And I think from what you guys were just saying, if people are uncomfortable with having those direct conversations, this is what I like, this is what I don't like, this is what you need to do. If that's too intense for people, then it can always be something that's definitely worked for me, particularly in partners who haven't been long-term, is sort of telling stories about experiences in the past, or not in a kind of, I'm very comfortable with hearing people's sexual experiences because I think it's what we've been part of, and then you are saying, oh yeah, I had this experience and I really liked it when they did this, or I had this and I really didn't like it when that happened. Because I think it's a less direct way, a less direct approach.
I had a friend.
Yeah.
But you can lead in from things like porn or films or books or something.
Yeah.
They're all quite good.
Like, I'd love it if you did that.
Yeah, exactly. Have you heard of this program? They did this and I'm really not sure about that.
Yeah, so wild.
Or what do you think about what they did on this? Which gives you that sort of pressure off. It's not specifically about your relationship.
Yeah, 100%. I love that approach. So another one is sexting. Is that something you guys have tried?
Yeah, we have done, haven't we? I used to work night shift a lot, so before you fell asleep, that was something sometimes that we'd do. We'd exchange a few pictures or messages.
And you'd be like, right, I'm coming home in whatever time. I'm really, really looking forward to it. You sort of get ready, sort of thing. And so I would quite often text back, be like, yeah, I'm ready and waiting, sort of thing. And so that really sort of gets the mood going before they've even got to see each other. That does make quite a good. We found it really useful, I think.
And I guess in situations where pictures are not practical for work reasons or for confidence reasons even, there's things like voice notes now, which is just a fabulous addition for sexting.
Yeah.
Or even, somebody like me would have to go a little bit out there because I don't know if I feel as comfortable talking about it by text. I'd probably find a dirty quote on the internet from a Jane Austen novel or Shakespeare or something and whack that in, see if it did the trick.
I think it's quite nice to have things in your words as well, though. So I think voice notes are quite a good idea.
I don't know if you watched Sex Education, where their sexting was telling a story of like a fantasy novel, and it was just this story. They were just writing a line each of this story that just ended up in this. I can't remember if they were like knights and princesses or something like that. It was like a fantasy setup. I thought it was a great idea.
Yeah,
there's loads of good stuff on that show.
The good thing with that as well is it can, as long as it's in an established relationship, you've got trust and boundaries and that. But to look back on that, it can be quite good to look back, even if you're on your own a few months later, think, oh, I remember that when we were sending those messages and that. And you scroll back through and find it. Even if you're on your own, it can be a catalyst for whatever. But
we have a folder called the Wank Bank.
Of things
that we've sent to each other over the years. Actually, I think it's quite a useful thing because if one of us is horny and the other one is not, I mean, we've got that to go back on, and it's us.
Yeah.
And it's technically, I suppose, porn of us.
That's genius.
But some of it's things we've done, some of it's just photos that we've sent, and I mean, it's always been something that we've been quite open with photos and things. I've always been quite an exhibitionist, so
Yeah.
I've always been quite into that. But it's quite nice to look back on
Yeah. I love
and
that.
to have available for, whenever we want to, like, do you remember this? Sort
Yeah.
of thing. It's really good to send something back, going, yeah, really, really in the mood. Do you remember this moment? And it does really amp you up a bit.
And even in your own time as well, I think, if you are sorting yourself out, I think it's so helpful to, not all the time do I think about my partner in those situations, but when I do, I'm like, oh, that I feel more connected even though he wasn't even here.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, not all sex has to be with each other.
No.
I mean, and if you're using stuff from each other, there should be no jealousy issue as well,
Yeah.
which I think is quite nice. It's quite a nice safe space for.
So another option is simmering. So simmering is where we gradually, and I think this is what you guys spoke about a little bit earlier, about where you throughout the day have little sexual things that are out of context. So like kissing on the neck or grabbing the bum or whispering in your ear, but in completely out of context situations, when you're washing the dishes or leaving the house or, just putting the washing on or whatever it is, stuff that's out of context that it sort of builds you up and makes your unconscious mind think about it when your subconscious is switched off about it. So it's like, ooh, it sort of makes you excited. And this is something you guys practice?
We do this a lot, yeah. Again, because me being an exhibitionist.
We did it before you even told us it had a name.
Yeah.
It's just something we found over...
I quite regularly flash at him throughout the day, at really random points of the day.
Usually very inopportune moments.
Yeah, the weirder the better.
I can't act upon anything. But yeah, I think it works really well for us. And it doesn't just need to be physical things as well, little physical cues. I mean, I can remember in the past I've written little notes for you. If I know you're on the phone and you need to be serious, I've written a little note that I'm hoping, again, will start triggering your mind, and you'll later on in the day, you'll be like, yeah, let's act upon that now. So just little notes, little handwritten notes and post-it notes and things like that. As long as, you've not got a house full of kids that are like, Mummy, what does this mean? That's a little bit different, isn't it? But
I think we've got better with this as time's gone on. I mean, this is also public displays of affection as well. This is another one of those things I used to be really against, and then I've got more and more into as we've got through our marriage, as the years have gone on. And it's something that also helps, I think.
Yeah.
Just, it's self-consciousness, I think. The more you break it down, the more you can just have fun with each other.
So the 6-second kiss, this is recommended by clinical sexologist Tanya Cones, which is, as it sounds, 6 seconds of that goodbye kiss in the morning, or the welcome home kiss, rather than just like a peck on the lips, is going for the full 6 seconds. Go on,
I think
Fran.
the idea is taking the time, but we've just made this weird. We tried this and we've just made it really weird. So it didn't really work for us, but I think it's more about the time, because you start humming the seconds and that just gets fun.
I can't keep count in my head. So
No, and then we just end up giggling at each other. But then that in itself is quite fun, and it's time together.
Yeah, even the concept of we're not just having a peck kiss to leave, we're going full in, even though we're not going to do anything like with it, but it's just like you leave the house on a good note.
It's making the effort, I think. Yeah.
So our final point is first base dates, which I love the concept of this. This is by relationship coach Pam Costa. So this is where you pencil in time to have a romantic night together, and you basically just make out. You can't go past first base. And I just love the idea of the sexual tension that this would create. I don't think it would ever succeed, but I think the concept of it, in that we're restricted, we're not allowed to do anything else, I think it's fabulous.
Yeah, no, I think I find this really frustrating.
I think the concept's great because it's like edging, isn't it? Just with a different word. It's building that tension. And do you know what? You're old enough and responsible enough to say, fuck it, I'm just going to break the rules now. We'll do what we want anyway. But I think as an intention, I think it's great. But if it needs some more, it needs some more.
I think this is just doing anything with children around, because the stuff gets in the way anyway. When they're really not up for going to bed, and you're just like, right, we're not going to get past that anyway.
Well, listen, we've covered so much today, and that's all we've got time for at the moment. We'd like to thank you all for listening, and please leave us a review or a like, or follow us on Instagram or TikTok at Coupled or Team Coupled. And we've got a little website now, www.coupled.com. We'd love to see you there. We've got some vlogs there as well. Thanks so much for listening, and we hope to see you on
It's
our
not
next
that deep.
podcast.